Good morning, welcome to CATEX-TV. My name is Frank Fortunato. This is a live broadcast from Princeton, New Jersey. Today is Friday, March 18, 2011. It's 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. It's 3:30 p.m. in London, 12:30 in Hamilton, and in Mexico City, 9:30 a.m. If you need to reach us during the broadcast, you can phone in toll-free at 1-866-67-CATEX. Overseas, our AOL instant mail address is CATEX-TV. A programming note: on Tuesday, we will be interviewing Peter Montanaro, the head of the Delegated Authorities Unit at Lloyd's. Mr. Montanaro will be at the American Association of Managing General Agents Conference out in Dallas. CATEX will have a booth there, and we will be interviewing him from our booth. We hope to get that interview on Wednesday, so it will be recorded. Next time I talk to you on Friday, barring any catastrophes later today, it will be spring. Finally. Now to our main news. Main news once again is focusing on Japan. The Prime Minister just came off the TV there saying that the situation is very grave. The Japanese have raised the severity level of the nuclear crisis at the Fukushima plant up to the level of 3 Mile Island. People are still scratching their heads saying that in fact it's already worse than that. It's now at a level 5. The highest is level 7, and that would be Chernobyl. The hallmarks of a level 5 emergency are severe damage to a reactor core. They've had that. Release of large quantities of radiation with a high probability of significant public exposure. They've certainly had that. A reporter working for Al Jazeera, Andrew Thomas, said that this raising of the severity level is quite an admission by the Japanese government. They're very cautious, so this is a fairly big development. Chinook military helicopters have dumped water on the plant, tons of water on the plant. Fire engines, as we just showed you, are being deployed into action to douse fuel rods inside the reactors. The effort to bring a power line a mile and a half to the plant apparently has been completed. The power line is now at the plant. The difficulty is now that it's going to take time for the line to reach the reactor's power system. That will take another 10 to 15 hours. Officials are saying that they hope to get a cable to 2 reactors sometime today and to 2 others by Sunday. Remember, there are 4 reactors there. Even if Tokyo Electric Power manages to connect the power, it's not clear whether or not the pumps will still work because they may have been damaged by the earthquake or by other explosions. The Japanese are finally conceding today that burying the nuclear plant in sand and concrete, as the Russians did with Chernobyl, may be a last resort to prevent a catastrophic radiation release. Meanwhile, more foreign governments are urging their citizens to steer clear of Tokyo. Britain, France, Germany, Australia, and New Zealand are among the countries advising their nationals to leave Tokyo. And the ever-helpful European Union energy chief, a day after he said Japan was facing an apocalypse, Gunther Oettinger, today said the site is effectively out of control. I'll tell you, with people like that running around, you don't need any sensationalism. Meanwhile, the G7 did Japan a good turn. They worked collaboratively to vow to stem the yen's rise. This, of course, will help the Japanese economy by allowing it to export more quickly. Analysts said that the G7 nations, in a statement on Friday morning, said that they agreed to cooperate as appropriate to address excessive and volatile movements in the foreign exchange market. Traders welcomed the decision, which was made after key talks between authorities in Japan, Europe, the U.S., Canada, and Britain. In reaction, the yen weakened finally. It had spiked earlier this week to the highest level against the dollar since World War II. The Tokyo stock market went up about 2.75 points after the G7 announcement. Meanwhile, last night at the UN, a vote by the Security Council, with China and Russia abstaining 10-0, voted to impose a no-fly zone over Libya. The British reacted very quickly, beginning to move Typhoon and Tornado fighter jets to air bases in the area in the coming hours, so they're presumably there by now. The French have also responded in suit. They also have fighter planes on site as well. The Americans are now saying that they've been in contact with President Sarkozy and Prime Minister Cameron regarding coordinating the no-fly zone. The White House put out a statement last night saying that Libya must immediately comply with all terms of the resolution and that violence against the civilian population must cease. There's no word yet from the American military as to what role it's going to take. The French government said that they would not comment on, quote, where, how, what target, or in what form the strikes would take. Amazingly, about an hour ago, this man appeared on Libyan television. He's the foreign minister of Libya, and he announced that there's going to be a ceasefire declared, and the Libyan government has apparently called on their troops that are getting ready to besiege the town of Benghazi, where the rebels are located, to stop. So the situation is very fluid. The military apparently has been activated, certainly the Americans, the French, and the British. Whether or not now they can be precluded from acting because of the Libyan announcement of a ceasefire is yet to be determined, but we should know sometime today. It's about 4 p.m. in the afternoon over there. There's plenty of daylight. In Riyadh, Saudi Arabia today, a 3-minute speech by 87-year-old King Abdullah ended up promising a multi-billion-dollar package of reforms, raises, cash, loans, and apartments and jobs in what appeared to be his most expensive effort yet to appease residents who may have been inspired by the unrest that has swept two leaders from power. He announced 60,000 new jobs in, well, where else? The security forces. This would be a move that would employ huge numbers of jobless young men. The ailing king, his soft voice trembling, rarely looked up from his notes in a speech broadcast live on Saudi TV. Although protests in Saudi Arabia have been very small and tiny and swiftly quelled, the monarchy is clearly worried about the influence of Shiite majorities in Bahrain as well as possibly in Saudi Arabia. Saudi troops have intervened in Bahrain. The Saudi demonstrators have mostly come from the Shiite-dominated eastern quarter of the kingdom. Of course, Saudi Arabia is completely dominated by the Al Faisal family, who are exclusively Sunni Muslims. The king said, quote, "You are the shields of this homeland and the beating hand of those who dare challenge its security and stability. May God bless you and your actions." Let's see if that's enough money to get them to be quiet. Well, as predicted, a French judge ruled yesterday that Airbus is going to be investigated for alleged manslaughter over the 2009 crash of the Air France flight from Rio to Paris. Thomas Enders, the Airbus CEO, said that preliminary charges were filed after the judge met in Paris with Airbus lawyers. Preliminary charges simply allow for further investigation. Enders said that Airbus would continue to cooperate with the probe. The stock market is up today. We go to a word from our sponsors and come back with the rest of the news. Everest Re announced last night that they expect to post $120 million to $180 million after tax in losses resulting from last month's earthquake in Christchurch, New Zealand. Everest said that the preliminary estimate is based on the assumption that the quake will generate an industry-wide loss of between 8 to 12 billion, and that these loss figures are subject to revision. Everest also affirmed earlier estimates that it will post 37 million in losses after tax from the January storms and flooding in Australia. Everest Chairman Joseph Taranto said regarding the Japanese earthquake, quote, "While we expect this loss to be significant, it is still too early to provide a reasonable or reliable estimate considering the fluidity of the situation." He did add that Everest has, quote, "ample capacity to withstand the events that occurred during the first quarter," which of course would be the earthquake. Chaucer said that they're reducing their best estimate for claims arising from the New Zealand earthquake last year, that would be the first one, and the Australian floods. Chaucer had previously estimated that the combined total loss from these two events at £24 million. They reduced it this morning down to £17 million, so they shaved £7 million off. Chaucer is also providing an initial loss estimate based on an industry loss of $12 billion for the February earthquake. They're saying that they'd be on the hook for £19 million. Chaucer is currently assessing its exposure to the Japanese earthquake. It said that they'll provide a further update in due course. It's an interesting story. This was in Business Insider today. It's an interesting little note. They note that when the earthquake hit a week ago, the first set of foreign companies to see a drop in prices were reinsurers. Their shares plummeted and the cost of credit insurance, collateralized debt swaps, for them spiked. And while the share losses might make some sense on the face of it, the spike in collateralized debt swaps for companies like Hanover Re, SCOR, and Munich might have been irrational. This is according to an analyst named Rutger Kranz from Societe Generale. He said the event in Japan seems more a risk to reinsurance earnings than to their balance sheets. Here's what he says. He says now that EcoCat has published a substantially lower loss estimate of $12 to $25 billion, including earthquake, ensuing tsunami, and fires, the estimate excludes losses from the nuclear emergency in Japan. But the analyst reminds investors that earthquake losses are excluded from the insurance of nuclear power plants, and that property insurance in Japan excludes losses from radiation. 2 to 4 billion of those losses are covered by the National Japanese Earthquake Pool. According to the analyst, the EcoCat loss estimate is more comprehensive and should support my view that the event was far less severe than predicted. Hence, he says, the March 11th earthquake should be more an earnings event rather than a balance sheet event for the reinsurance companies. Isn't that interesting? Here's an article that appeared in AM Best this morning. The Japanese earthquake last Friday might trigger a significant contingent business interruption claim flood thousands of miles away in the U.S. Best notes that standard components of American property policies are business interruption and contingent business interruption insurance. BI, the more widely known coverage, is triggered when an insured experiences a loss of business following a property loss. Here's a little trick. Contingent business interruption insurance also reimburses the insureds for lost profits after a physical loss, but unlike BI itself, it's triggered when the physical damage happens not to the insured, but to a client or supplier of the insured. The caveat, and this is a big one, is that the insured must be covered for the same peril that caused the damage to the client or supplier. So the insured must have earthquake and or flood coverage, which could trigger the contingent business insurance coverage if the client or supplier was damaged by earthquake or flood. AM Best analysts are continuing to speak with insurers about their exposure to the Japanese catastrophe, including asking companies who don't do business in Japan about their possible contingent BI exposure. Contingent business interruption is a standard coverage, says Best, but it's not the focus of many companies when they're getting their property insurance, so they might not even be aware of it. This would be very interesting, actually, because it's a unique situation. The amount of manufacturing and technology that takes place in Japan is so prodigious. Every piece of equipment that's purchased has computer chips, most of which come from Japan. So Best has identified a possible opening here that brokers presumably should be notifying their clients about. Well, for the last story, as we've talked a few times, the cat bond market is a little nervous because there is some exposure regarding Japan. The cat bonds are good because they provide a rather binary, objective measure of the severity of a disaster, and they facilitate speedier payments than indemnity-based triggers. Not quite so this time. The cat bond market has had a little bit of a setback because the Kyosho network of Japanese reporting stations, KNET, that provided the loss triggers were knocked out by the earthquake or by the later tsunami. Last night, Reuters reported that several of the catastrophe bonds that include Japanese quake as their exposures use a parametric trigger dependent on data from KNET. KNET went offline for 3 days after the tsunami. Recording values are now available, but several reporting stations have still not come back up, leaving the reported data open to challenge because it might not be complete. And boy, you know there'll be challenges there. Score's Atlas Capital 6 definitely uses KNET. Other bonds appear to be using Paradex from RMS or EcoCat's Japanquake. Paradex uses the USGS shake map. EcoCat does not use KNET. At least 2 bonds were likely to incur full losses based on initial unofficial tallies provided by Reuters. There is about $2 billion in total cat bond exposure via Montana Re and Valet Re. Valet Re has Flagstone Re as its cedent. Vega Capital and successor, they have Swiss Re. Score uses Atlas Capital, and Platinum uses Topiary Capital. The modeling agencies have up to 40 days to calculate their final index values once they've received the data from the measuring sources. But if KNET can't supply the data, the situation is going to become a little bit more murky, and you can be sure that there are going to be lawsuits. That's the news for today. Next weekend or next Monday, we'll see you. It'll be spring. And we'll be monitoring the news. If there's anything developing in either Fukushima or Libya, we'll come back and tell you. Thank you for watching, and have a pleasant weekend.